So, let's see, to get started, the subject of this, podcast recording is psilocybin. Basically, my experiences with psilocybin. I want to start off this first episode, by talking about actually how I discovered psychedelics, which I think is an interesting and unique viewpoint. I also eventually, one thing I do want to get out there is I want to try to consolidate my thoughts on Christianity and the psychedelics, and I want to see how I can integrate them into each other. I'm a fairly conservative person. I grew up Christian, and I still consider myself a very strong Christian and everything like that, but I need to reevaluate, I guess. This probably sounds really bad to any fundamentalist Christian is going to say, why do you need to reevaluate? Well, psychedelics, they make you reevaluate. So these things need to be reconciled, psychedelics and Christianity. And so that's going to be like a huge, huge theme, I think, of my recordings going forward. But for now, let's just start out with how I discovered psychedelics. Like I said, I think it's unique. I was a police officer for 3 years. As a police officer, I was fortunate enough to be able to take some drug classes. One of the last classes I took when I was a police officer was the DRE class, and our school, DRE school, and it's just Drug Recognition Expert. That's what DRE stands for. If you ever come across a DRE on the side of the road, they're going to perform all sorts of tests on you to figure out exactly what drug you're on, if you are on a drug and driving. So the DRE school, this is kind of where it all started and everything. This is how I discovered psychedelics. So I had never done any drug ever. I never even smoked a cigarette. And here I am in my mid-30s as a police officer and going to a drug school and learning about drugs. And it's quite fascinating. There are a lot of officers who still believe in the whole war on drugs and everything like that, and that's a huge motivation for a lot of them. But there's also a lot of officers who are just interested and find them fascinating. And I'll get to that when we get to the actual hallucinogenics psychedelic category. But basically, the way the government views drugs, as they say, a drug is any substance that, when taken into the body, will affect the person's ability to drive. That's a drug. That's the definition of a drug for police officers and the government. So any substance that, when taken into the body, will affect the person's ability to drive. So it's like a really, really broad blanket for what a drug is. It includes things, and they even talk about this in the class, in the school, things like nicotine and caffeine are considered drugs that you can be arrested for driving on. I had one of the teachers of the school said that, he got a conviction off of somebody who had drank like 10 Red Bulls like within a half an hour or something like that, and was driving, and basically they were jacked up on it, and it's considered a stimulant, caffeine is, and so he got a conviction. He got a conviction because he was able to prove that the person had basically was unable to drive due to the fact that he was on the caffeine. So it's really interesting. It's also really, I don't know, hypocritical. It's not I don't know if it's hypocritical or not, but just how do they determine like what drugs are useful and not useful, and because you can get prescriptions for, all sorts of depressants. You can get prescriptions for all sorts of narcotics, and stimulants as well. You can get a prescription for stimulants. Now, depending on what state you're in, you could get a prescription for cannabis, or you might just have a state where it's recreational. But so there's a lot of different drugs out there. In fact, there's hundreds of drugs just in the depressant category of the DRE school. Let's go over that real quick. Let's go over the different categories that DRE creates. So DRE takes all drugs and basically mashes them all into 7 categories. And the categories all make sense because basically the drugs only produce X amount of effects on the body. And so when you see those effects, that's how you can determine what drug somebody's on. So the first category is depressants, which includes things like alcohol, but it also includes things like Xanax or prescription drugs like that. There's a few like illegal drugs in there too, but a lot of those are illegal. Actually, the depressants, or a lot of them are prescription drugs. The second category is stimulants, so that includes things like cocaine and meth. There are a few legal versions of stimulants. The third category is the hallucinogens. That's our psychedelics, and we'll get into that category pretty hardcore. And we'll just go over it more in depth in hallucinogens. So the fourth category is dissociative anesthetics, and it's basically just PCP. The category used to be called PCP because it was its own thing, but now there's been a few other drugs that kind of mimic PCP. So then you have the next category is narcotics. That's heroin, methadone, things like that. Then you have inhalants, which is the second to last category. Inhalants, that's the most dangerous category right there. Inhalants, that's when one of the parts of inhalants is like when a kid goes to Walmart and grabs a duster, one of those spray cans to clean off your keyboard or whatever. They take those and they inhale those. And what that does is that literally deprives your brain of oxygen, and it literally kills your brain cells, and that's how you get high. So inhalants is the most dangerous category out of all these. And then cannabis is the last category. We all know about cannabis. I don't need to go too much into depth into that. Although I would like to talk about cannabis later when I get into some of my trips. I have taken cannabis with psilocybin, and the effect is incredible. It's much different. But anyways, so let's go back here and let's talk about the hallucinogen category. So what they do when they're teaching these categories, the classes is several weeks long, and they go over the drugs, they go over the names of them and everything like that. The hallucinogen category is probably the most sparse and least information-based category that they have. Because the government and the police, to be honest, just do not know a whole lot about them. They don't know as much about hallucinogens, as basically anything you can find on YouTube. You can find people on YouTube that know way, way more about hallucinogens than the police do. Let me take a look at my book real quick here. I'm going to open it up to the hallucinogens section. And like I said, the whole section in the DRE book, it's so sparse. They get a few things right. They talk about synesthesia, and they get that right for the most part, the mixing of the senses and everything like that. That's incredible. I had my second trip. I think it was my second trip. I watched an Elton John concert on my TV, and I cranked up the music, and when I closed my eyes, the sounds, I could see the sounds appear as colors, and it was incredible. And I could also feel the sounds. So that was a really, really interesting trip. That was one of the ones I was like, okay, I need to keep exploring what's possible here. But anyways, back to the book here. So a couple things. The reason why they call the category hallucinogens and not psychedelics is because what they believe, what the police and the government believe, is that these are hallucinations that you have, basically. So while you're on a psychedelic, they believe that you're basically just hallucinating. And they say their definition here in the book is a hallucinogen is a sensory experience of something that does not exist outside the mind. So, I mean, that's a very, very interesting definition of a hallucinogen, a psychedelic drug. They go on to mention a couple things here about which senses are affected, and I think they get this wrong. Now, this is my experiences, but they say that they can affect your sense of smell and your sense of taste, which those are two senses that when I am on psychedelics, or at least when I'm on psilocybin, I haven't taken any other psychedelics, I've only taken psilocybin, but when I'm on psilocybin, my taste buds are, I want to say they're either normal or they're slightly like dented or deaded. You know, they're not very active, and I certainly don't taste anything extreme or, you know, don't get any extra tastes or anything like that. The same thing with the sense of smell. I like to smoke a hookah like as I'm on my way up on the trip, and as I'm smoking out of the hookah, you know, like the flavor is either normal or slightly deaded, you know, and the sense of the smell of the hookah is also, you know, deaded or just not there. So that's one thing I think the hallucinations, or they get wrong on the hallucinogenic category, especially like, if you take DMT or if you take salvia, you know, and you're shot out of your body like that, I mean, the sense of smells and sense of taste, it's just not there, you know. So I think they get that wrong. Let's see. Let me turn a couple pages here and just kind of see what they got. Okay, so like I said, they believe these are yeah, my tongue's starting to get a little twisted here. They believe they're hallucinations. So what they say is it's basically a psychedelic is giving you three different like outcomes. They either think that you're delusional, or you're seeing illusions, or you're becoming psychomimetic. You're having a psychosis attack or something like that. So the first part, delusion, right? So for them, a delusion is a false belief, right? The example they give is they say, I am an elephant. So you could possibly have a delusion where you say, I am an elephant. And man, we go all the way into this, you know. And one of the things as we go along, as I keep kind of describing my trips and everything like that, I very much come to believe that some of these things that I see are definitely real. That's a hard one to grapple with, and that's one of the things. That's why I'm creating this podcast or this recording here is, and I have to tie this back into Christianity as well. You know, like I said, I consider myself still to be a strong Christian, but I need to put together these things here, these things I see when I'm on psychedelics, when I'm on mushrooms, when I have that, you know, 5-gram heroic dose with, you know, marijuana. I go to a place that seems just as real, if not more real, than our world or where we're at now. So that's something I have to grapple with. So what the police would say, or what the government would say, is I am delusional. They would say that you are, you're basically crazy. You're seeing things that aren't there, you know, or you're believing things that aren't real. So that's the next part. That's illusion, right? A false perception. So illusion is a false perception, a misrepresentation of what the senses are receiving. So their example is, I see an elephant, right? So, Now, this is interesting. Anybody that's taken psychedelics, or anybody that has, or even if you watch, I remember watching a TV show, it's on Netflix, it's called Have a Good Trip. And on there, Carrie Fisher's talking about her experiences on acid, and she talks about an acorn. And the acorn is really there, right? She's saying, I don't see things that aren't real. I don't see things that aren't there in the real world. It just, those things take on a different life. And I can kind of relate. There's a difference between when you're actually, like on DMT, when you're like shot out of your body, which I have experienced the same thing on the psilocybin, versus when you're on a lower dose, 2.5 grams maybe of psilocybin, and you look around your room, and I'll look around my room and I'll see I have some furs that are hanging on my wall, and I have some deer antlers and things like that, and I have like these very highly decorative curtains. When I look at them, these things do seem to take on a life of their own, but none of them change into something they're not, you know what I mean? At no point in time does one of my furs get up and start walking around the room. That's not something that happens. So that's something that I don't think the government or police officers quite understand. They don't understand that kind of stuff, that part of it. All right, let's get a little bit further into the book. Like I said, they believe that these hallucinogens, which going forward I'll just be calling them psychedelics. But anyways, they believe they're psychomimetic. So what that means is it just mimics psychosis. So what they believe is happening is you are having a psychosis attack. You are basically, I don't know, I guess they would understand that it's temporary, although I don't know how far they go into stuff like that. I mean, I remember when I was in the class and I was learning about this stuff and they're talking about it, they kind of implied that basically you could get stuck in a trip forever. And we know that's completely untrue. That just doesn't happen. You don't get stuck in the trip forever. You do come back to this world. So, and at that point in time, I guess they think you're gone or whatever, or something like that. They separate these hallucinogens, psychedelics, into two categories. You have natural and then you have synthetic. Now they consider LSD to be a synthetic. I know it's technically from, a fungus, but they consider it to be synthetic. So anyways, the natural ones are obviously psilocybin, which is the most popular one, but they also got peyote and salvia in here as a couple things. A couple things that I like that they get into this book that they do get right, but they're just like footnotes though, but they do talk about their historical use a little bit. It says, mushrooms have been used in Native American religious ceremonies for thousands of years. And then for salvia, it says, Salvia divinorum has been used by the Mazatec Indians for its ritual divination and healing. So they have a little bit of that in there, but these pages are like 6 sentences worth of information, really. I mean, see, there are over 185 known species of mushrooms that contain psilocybin and psilocin. That's right, I guess. I mean, it's just... let's see. They talk about salvia only having 15 to 13 minutes of activation time, really, which is kind of, I guess that's good. Let's see. They mentioned a couple other naturally occurring hallucinogens like nutmeg, Jimson weed, morning glory seeds. It's funny. My mom tells a story of when she accidentally took Jimson weed, which is interesting. And she did not like that. So then we get into the synthetics, and that includes like MDMA. They consider LSD a synthetic, and so Oh, and then the other thing is, a lot of this information is outdated. They don't really talk about DMT in here anywhere. In this entire book, God, I mean, a DMT, it's like mentioned like once or twice at most. So it's not. I guess they don't really know too much about it. Really, they consider these other things to be more prevalent: MDMA and MDA, 2CB. Yeah, I'm just not seeing anything. They talk about mescaline, of course. That's what comes from the cactuses. That's really, really interesting that they don't talk about DMT in here. That's something I'm just now noticing as I'm going through this. Yeah, that's crazy. So it just kind of shows how far behind they are, right? I mean, DMT is probably, that's the one that Joe Rogan talks about the most. So it's probably the most popular out of the, out of the newer American-based, psychedelics here. So that's pretty interesting. They don't mention anything about ayahuasca in here, of course. I assume ayahuasca just isn't on anybody's radar in America as far as, policing is concerned. So, let's see here. Okay, so now, when I'm going through this class, like I said, this class, the DRE class, is several weeks long. And you're learning about all this stuff, and some of it's interesting, some of it's not very interesting. Like, some of it's really dull and boring. They're going over human anatomy and everything like that, and how it all works. Most drugs affect other parts of your body. What's interesting is hallucinogens don't appear to affect other parts of your body. They appear just to affect your mind, which is interesting. And that's been my experience also on psilocybin. The effects that I do end up getting on my body are mostly reconnection type stuff, like my brain trying to reconnect to the body, but my body appears to be normal. That's pretty interesting, and that's pretty much how everybody describes it, I believe. I guess on ayahuasca you get like nauseated and everything like that, but the nauseation is not a product of the drug itself. It's more like the ingestion of of these strange plants. The same thing when I take psilocybin, every once in a while I do get a little nauseated. It doesn't appear to be an effect of the drug itself, of the psilocybin going into your brain. It appears to be an effect of the fact that I'm eating this nasty tasting mushroom, you know what I mean? That's, kind of light and fluffy and crispy and kind of in your stomach, So I think it's the other things that are causing you to get nauseated when you take these kind of substances. But I don't know for sure. That's something maybe I need to investigate a little bit more. If anybody knows any more, maybe you can contact me. Anyways, so in these classes, and this is almost every drug class I took in law enforcement, they always show the video of the guy smoking salvia in his car, right? He sits there, he does the joke, hey, I'm gonna smoke salvia and I'm gonna drive the car. And then he smokes the salvia, the cat jumps on the hood, and he can't move for 15 minutes. And then he does the gardening video too. And the guy appeared on Hamilton's Pharmacia episode on salvia. So that video is shown to every law enforcement officer and almost every single drug-based class that he goes to. So we all see that. And one of the things interesting about salvia is salvia was legal in all 50 states, just a few years ago. And so one of the questions we ask as we're going through this, and one of the things we have to know is we have to know what schedule of drug something is, right? Psilocybin's a Schedule 1 drug. Well, salvia, we asked, hey, what's salvia? What level drug is it? And the teacher didn't know. The teacher didn't know what classification salvia fell under. And everybody started to look it up, and they're like, okay, well, is it illegal? Is it not illegal? The government, the federal government, hasn't classified it into a category yet. Now, certain states have have tried to put it into categories themselves, and so it's restricted in certain states and not in others. And so when we found this out, a couple people started asking, a couple of the other officers in the class with me started asking, what do you think? We got a hold of some of this stuff, you know what I mean? Some of them were saying it in a joking manner, obviously, but I think some of them were serious about it. And it caught my attention because I kind of keyed into that. I kind of keyed into the people that were saying it a little more sincerely. They were just kind of saying, hey, what if we went and tried this stuff? We're learning about all these drugs and how they're affecting your body and everything like that. Now, some drugs I would never, ever want to take, you know, any of the narcotics. You know, they're addictive. You know, you can die on them. You know, the depressants can really destroy the chemical makeup of your brain. You know, just get you to a point where you have to be on them in order to survive. There's things like that with the depressants. The stimulants have incredible amounts of addictiveness to them, and what it is, it's a physical thing too. That's one of the things that we were learning about, you know, with these drugs. Is this, like the narcotics, you know, is they're so addictive, and it's a body addiction. You know, meth, your body physically has to have it in order for you just to survive, you know what I mean? So it's incredible. Alcohol is addictive, and one of the things that a lot of people don't admit, but is absolutely true, is marijuana is also addictive. So now the interesting thing that we found about all the hallucinogens is, whoa, they're not addictive. Okay, hold on here. So we're looking at this from a safety perspective, you know, as officers, you know, and we're like, okay, out of all the drugs, you know, this is a conversation that we had, out of all the drugs and the drug categories, which ones would you be willing to try? Everybody said hallucinogens, you know. I'm sure a few people said cannabis or something. Some of them have obviously smoked cannabis in the past, you know. I never had. So, that was it. So it's like hallucinogens because they're the ones that are going to do the least amount of damage to you. So, me, I've got to take it a step further. And I end up asking a girl that I know, she's just a girl I know at the time. Later on, she becomes my girlfriend. She's now my trip sitter. But at the time, I just kind of asked her. I said, "Hey, do you know anything about salvia? Is there any way you can get a hold of some salvia?" And she said, "I'm not for sure. I don't know what that is. Is that a strain of weed?" Because she smoked weed, and I knew that. And that's one of the reasons I asked her. She smoked some weed, and so I said, "Well, no, it's something completely different. It's not marijuana. It's its own plant. It's different." And she said, "I don't know. I'll ask around." She asked around. She couldn't really find anything. And me and her kind of sat down one day, and I kind of told her about all the stuff I learned in DRE school about all these drugs and everything. And I was mentioning a couple of the other hallucinogens and everything. And it turned out she had a friend who did know how to get some psilocybin mushrooms. So we were like, okay, that's interesting. Let me do a little research. I start doing research. I find, as soon as you type in psilocybin into YouTube, first person that's going to come up is Paul Stamets. So I sit there and I start listening to a bunch of Paul Stamets stuff, and I'm like, whoa! I'm like, my mind's like blown away by all this information that I'm getting about how it's creates neurogenesis. It like that was one of the things that caught me right there. Neurogenesis. When he started saying that stuff, and I actually kind of like paid attention to like, what is he talking about? He's talking about your brain like making new connections and growing. You know, because as an adult, you know, your brain stops growing. And he's talking about being able to cure Alzheimer's. And I know my dad has, he kind of has a slight memory problem. You know, it's not bad. It's not like Alzheimer's or anything like that. But like me and the family are worried that eventually one day he will possibly be susceptible to getting Alzheimer's. And I know myself, I also kind of have a shaky sort of memory in general. Like I tend to forget things I don't want to remember. I don't know, maybe that's everybody. But you know, my memory's not that great and everything. So I'm like, hey, psilocybin. Okay, now I'm coming up with kind of an excuse. You know, I'm coming up with an excuse in my mind of how I can try these. I also kind of learned a little bit more about, I'm a Native American. I actually took an ancestry test and found out how much Native American was, which was a lot more than I thought I was. I was kind of under the impression I was only about 15% Native American, and it turned out I was a lot more than that, but on both sides of my family. So anyways, so I also kind of looked into that. I'm like, okay, and my tribe is actually from Mexico, which was also another thing that kind of connected me. So everything's kind of coming together. It's kind of connecting, and I'm coming up with excuses on why, okay, I've never had a drug before. Maybe I can try one of these. Maybe I can try psilocybin, and maybe this stuff will work. And another thing that really intrigues me about it, one of the things was synesthesia. Is they sit there and when they talk about, they're talking about, seeing sounds. Like, that sounds crazy. Like, what are you talking about? You can see sounds? The concept, the idea kind of blew my mind, and I was kind of like, I never realized, you could do something like that on psychedelics. So anyways, we end up getting a hold of the mushrooms, and at the time I'm still a police officer. Yeah, I was still a police officer, and we sat down in my living room and we turned on heavy metal, which was the best thing I could think of. That I was like stereotypical, just like psychedelic. That's what I thought of. I thought of heavy metal, the cartoon from whatever the 80s or whenever it came out, 70s, 80s. So I thought of that, and I only took a very, very small amount. So okay, I guess we're going over my first trip here, everything. I took a very small amount, and I saw the colors, just slowly change on the TV and everything, and it was a very pleasant and fun experience, to say the least. I'll get a little bit more into it later and everything like that. I think the point I want to leave off on this podcast, I kind of want to stop it about here, is mostly I was going over, the fact that I was a police officer. That's where I got the concept, and I was introduced to the idea of psychedelics, and I was introduced to kind of what they're capable of, I guess, and what were the risks involved with taking them, and what just kind of what they, this is the most basic sense too. This is really, really basic of what I was able to find out, because as I went along, obviously as you start getting into those heroic doses, things start to change rather quickly, and you start to realize, well, everything I thought about or knew about these things was was radically different, So, yeah, I'll leave it off there. I think that's a good stopping point, and we'll just say, I think it's a unique perspective that I went from being a police officer to where I am now with psychedelics, and I can go into it deeper. We could. I really want this. I guess this podcast to focus on eventually Christianity and its relationship to psychedelics. That's something I have to mirror together, and so that's the main point of this podcast. But I would absolutely be willing to talk more about police and drugs, the war on drugs, things like that. And these are things that I have experience in. You know, I arrested people that were on drugs. I arrested people that were on drugs driving. I arrested people that were on drugs that were not driving. So I have a lot of, a decent amount, you know, like I said, I was a cop for 3 years. So I have a decent amount of experience when it comes to those type of things. It's not like the ultimate be-end-all, end-all or anything like that. I'm not like an absolute expert, but I have enough of an insight onto it that I think it could be helpful for some people. So if you guys want to hear more about that, let me know. But next time, I think I want to get into maybe a few of my trips and kind of the direction and themes that they followed, because they seem to follow a very specific pattern, and it's a pattern that I've studied, basically listening to people like Jordan Peterson, other people that believe in like archetypes, the Jungian archetypes, the shadow self, that kind of stuff. A lot of that stuff follows, and it seems to be correct. So I need to kind of integrate that into probably the next episode. I'll start talking about some of my trips, how they went, and how I integrated them into, I guess, my life as well as my just psyche and my concepts and predictions of the world and etc. So anyways, all right, thanks for anybody that listened, stuck around this long. Appreciate it.